Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out with Bud Collins, who died recently at the age of 86. Bud Collins was the legendary tennis writer and commentator for over 50 years, whose name basically became synonymous with tennis commentary. After World War II, he went to Boston University for grad school, and while he was there, he started writing for the Boston Herald, and eventually he got a job doing tennis reporting. The Bud Collins trivia question is that while he was doing tennis reporting in the late 50s and early 60s, he was also the tennis coach at Brandeis University for 4 years, and one of his players was Abby Hoffman. Here's Bud Collins talking about his career and talking about tennis.
Tennis has been a passion of mine for a long time. Purely by accident did I become a tennis employed person, I guess you might say, and doing television and radio.
Federer got emotional, different sorts of tears tonight.
Yes, because he was the victor then, but we found out that the rain, R-E-I-G-N, from Spain has fallen on this concrete plain right here in Melbourne.
Ed Costello at the Herald assigned me when I was a copy boy. I was working part-time while I went to BU. I found out that nobody else on the staff wanted to cover tennis. It was very unpopular with my colleagues. So he said, well, you go out to Longwood Cricket Club and cover an event called the Massachusetts Women's Championships. He said, now don't question me. You're new on this, and you just have to do what I tell you to do. But I was secretly thrilled.
So we're right into a third set, and we don't know what's going to happen. I think we're going to see Margaret trying a lot more lobs against Rosie.
Well, Margaret Court going for that grand slam. We're going to show you the tape now going into the third set.
One shot I really remember is 1984 at the U.S. Open. Ivan Lendl is playing against Pat Cash. Lendl was facing match point.
Just under 3.5 hours these two have been going at one another.
And Cash, who was a great volleyer, came to the net, angled a volley off to Lendl's right. And Lendl just ran, lifted a topspin lob over Cash's head, landing on the far baseline. He saved the match point and he won the match. People ask me who the most influential people were in tennis. I always think of Billie Jean King because not just a great influence in women's tennis, but in tennis as a whole and sport as a whole. She's a pretty peppery person and she realizes these responsibilities and she goes at it full force. Arthur Ashe was a great influence in many ways because he was interested in education as well as tennis. Arthur had been trying to go to South Africa. He was outspoken on the subject of apartheid. People were so grateful to see Arthur, to see a world-class athlete. Arthur had a great effect on getting black kids into the game. I think the Williams sisters, who are now on top of the game, were encouraged by his success. If you've been around tennis for any length of time, you can see that it's not the same game that people are playing now. Scoring is the same, the court is the same size, but technology has taken over. There was more variety to the game when we had the wooden racket. You won't see a player today with the genius of John McEnroe. He shows the variety that we don't get from many other players. But I wonder, would he be as attractive with the high-tech racket? I don't know. I enjoy the game, and I want to see what comes next. This year was Kim Clijsters. Played 7 matches before the U.S. Open and won it unseeded. Brings her baby out to the court to show everybody. That was a joyful time. And so that's what keeps me coming back for the good stories.
Bud Collins on TV was known for his loud outfits, but he was well respected across the board. And last year, the Media Center at the U.S. Open Tennis Center was named the Bud Collins Media Center. We're going to move on now to our feature tonight, Pat Conroy, who died recently at the age of 70. He was the great writer from South Carolina who penned a number of books that were turned into movies, but his 2 most memorable books were The Prince of Tides, with Nick Nolte in an almost autobiographical role for Pat Conroy, and The Great Santini, which is about the relationship between Pat Conroy and his father. He dwelled a lot on his father, I think almost a little too much, but the movie features a legendary performance by Robert Duvall. Here's a brief snip on Pat Conroy's writing career.
Those first 2 books created dramatic controversy, both within Conroy's own family and his extended family and friends all across South Carolina. In 1976, when he published The Great Santini, the depiction of his dad as an abusive Marine Colonel fighter pilot so outraged his own brothers and sisters that for years some of them refused to even speak with Conroy. 3 years later, in '79, it was made into a successful Hollywood film with Robert Duvall starring as Conroy's fictional father. Few of his stories capture the essence of life in the Low Country any better than his 1986 classic, Prince of Tide. It followed the story of unemployed schoolteacher Tom Wingo, who's trying to come to terms with his dysfunctional family's past.
Here's a little bit of Prince of Tides with Nick Nolte. It's one of his best roles.
I've learned all I know about love from the women in my life. My daughters, my sister, my wife, my mother.
Children blame me for everything.
We won't do anything of him learning from Barbara Streisand mugging in that movie. But Conroy's classic is indeed The Great Santini.
My father, the Great Santini, I thought he could do anything but die. The toughest man I ever saw.
You know, Dad, not one of us has ever beaten you in a single game. Not checkers, not dominoes, not softball, nothing.
Watch it, Ben. He's getting that look.
Come on over here. Come on over here to Daddy Bull. Come all over, Colonel. Get out of here before I knock every freckle off your face.
That's mean. Wasn't that great?
Come on, Jocko. You got to win by 2 baskets. He said 1. I changed my mind. Let's go.
Now, you're not going to cheat the boy out of his victory. Come on, be a good sport.
Who the hell asked you anything?
Don't you talk to me like that.
I'm playing, Mom.
No, you won't. Now, he beat you, and it was beautiful.
Lily, you better get in the house before I kick your butt.
It was just beautiful.
No, I mean it. Come on, let's go. Hurry, come on.
Touch that ball.
You better move, woman. All right. Come on, let's go. Come on.
He's beating you.
Get out of here. Kind of like winning, huh, Dad? Get smart with me, Jocko. Kick your butt. Now, come on, guard me. You got to win by 2.
I'm not going to guard you, Dad.
Hey, Mama's boy. Mama's boy. I bet you're going to cry. Come on, Mama's boy. Let's see you cry. Come on. Squirt a few. Come on. Cry. Come on, cry. Come on. Come on. Just a few. Come on. Squirt a few. Come on. Squirt. Cry. Cry. 1, 2, 3. Come on, baby. Come on, little girl. Cry. Cry. My favorite daughter, Ben. I swear to God, you're my sweetest little girl. This little girl just wants your ass good, Colonel.
Well, at the end of his life, he had sort of a reapproachment with his father, which he discusses with family friend Charlie Gibson.
It was, ironically, the Great Santini that marked the changing point in the relationship between father and son.
The book he hated, but my father really got into the movie. My father died thinking he made the career of Robert Duvall. He said finally Duvall had a role with some meat on it.
After the movie's release, a warming of sorts took place. Conroy writes now that his father had the best second act I ever saw.
Dad was wordless. He never told me he loved me in his life. He died without telling me that. But there was something in his gestures that was letting me know that he was making some attempt. It's an amazing story. It seems that Mom and Dad, for whatever reason, created something of an amazing American family. And so the story seems like a good one to me.
Here Conroy talks about his time at the Citadel. For a long time, the Citadel didn't like him because of his book, The Lords of Discipline.
What really brought me to the Citadel was a 6'4", 240-pound Marine Corps fighter pilot. Dad saw the Citadel one time, and he, of course, never went here a day in his life. But he thought this would be a fine finishing school for his weak, shy, unmilitaristic son. And so Dad very happily filled out my application form, signed it, and then let me know the summer before I was to matriculate here that I was going to be a cadet at the Citadel. I found the Citadel very intimidating. I had walked into the toughest plebe system in the world, and it was a fact they were extraordinarily proud of. But the Citadel lets you know how tough life can be, but it gives you the resources to accept that fate, to deal with that fate, and to make your own fate because of it.
He also had a reapproachment with the Citadel, and near the end of his life, he was elected into the South Carolina Hall of Fame.
And I love days like today because I think we now know enough in South Carolina that we each survive and send each other waves of language, different language. And that has made all the difference in South Carolina. I cannot thank the state enough for finding me when I was a 15-year-old boy. Thank you very much.
Over and close tonight with Nancy Reagan, who died at the age of 94. A graduate of Chicago Latin, she became a middling actress and then became Ronald Reagan's second wife, managing his career. Jimmy Stewart once said that if she'd been his first wife, she'd have gotten him an Academy Award. There's no middle ground on Nancy Reagan, either love her or hate her, so let's stick with the biographical facts.
She was born Anne Frances Robbins on July 6, 1921, in New York.
Her birth father essentially abandoned her and her mother.
Nancy Reagan's mother was an actress, and she was on the road and away from Nancy. So I think she always felt kind of abandoned as a young child.
In 1929, Nancy was 7 years old when her mother married a prominent neurosurgeon named Loyal Davis. The move to his home in Chicago provided Nancy with a strong parental figure.
He was always there for her, which her biological father wasn't. He was quite inspirational for her.
After graduating from Smith College in 1943, Nancy moved to Hollywood to pursue work as an actress. It was there that she met an actor and recent divorcee named Ronald Reagan.
It ended up being an incredible love affair that people still, when they reflect on it and speak of it, feel it was one of the greatest relationships they've ever witnessed.
They married in a small ceremony on March 4, 1952. Nancy quickly settled into the role of homemaker, while her husband moved toward a career in politics.
It wasn't really too long into their marriage that she had her first child, her daughter. As a result of that, there really wasn't all that much time for Ronald and Nancy Reagan to just be newlyweds.
He had 2 children from the first marriage, and Nancy was a sometime mother to those 2.
In 1967, Ronald Reagan was elected governor of California. Life under the political limelight was not easy for Nancy.
The political coverage she received as a governor's wife was hypercritical.
The press was very hard on Nancy Reagan. They really played into the caricature and stereotypes of her as wealthy, privileged, distant.
Nancy Reagan responded to the criticisms by becoming a much more visible force in her husband's presidential campaign.
Every strategist knew what a powerful ally Nancy Reagan could be, and if they got on the wrong side of her, that they'd be gone.
In 1980, Ronald Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter to become the 40th President of the United States.
Nancy Reagan came in and undertook some refurbishing and redesign projects within the White House. And it led to some negative press.
But even her harshest critics could not deny Nancy's devotion to her husband.
Nancy Reagan was there as the president's wife, first and foremost.
She was highly conscientious about his nutrition, about his rest and sleep, about making sure he wasn't overworked.
In 1982, Nancy Reagan launched a national drug awareness campaign called Just Say No.
Nancy Reagan herself didn't just give it lip service, she traveled 250,000 miles to try to promote the Just Say No campaign.
Eventually, it became a policy issue that she was very much involved in.
After 8 years in the White House, Ronald and Nancy Reagan returned to California.
They were the most devoted couple that most people had ever seen.
They traveled around the world. They both wrote their memoirs. Once his Alzheimer's set in, Mrs. Reagan became his caretaker.
Ronald Reagan passed away on June 5, 2004. That same year, Nancy Reagan took an aggressive stance in support of stem cell research.
Nancy Reagan became more involved, asking then President George W. Bush to take a real look at embryonic stem cell funding and research.
Nancy Reagan has a fascinating legacy in that it goes from somebody seen as more style than substance and ended as having perhaps more substance than style.
Well, Nancy Reagan was a pretty hard person. Her stepfather, Loyal Davis, was pretty much a hard ass too. He was a neurosurgeon here. I know a lot of people who knew him. Many people credit him as conservatism into turning Ronald Reagan from a Democrat into a Republican. I want to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. And one other thing about Nancy Reagan, she was good friends with Frank Sinatra. How good a friend she was depends on who you read. If you read Kitty Kelly, they were quite good friends. If you read Randy Tabarelli, they weren't that good friends. I'll leave that to you to decide if you know what I mean. We'll close with Frank singing Nancy with the Laughing Face, written by Jimmy Van Heusen and Phil Silvers. Yes, that Phil Silvers. It was originally about his daughter, Nancy Sinatra, but take it for what it's worth. Later in life, he did sing it to Nancy Reagan.
If I don't see her each day I miss her. Gee, what a thrill each time I kiss her. Believe me, I've got a case on Nancy with a laughing face.